Hey everyone, welcome back to the Crime Whisper today. We're diving into the dark underbelly of Paris, a city known for romance and beauty, but also hiding shadows of crime, mystery, and betrayal. This is Paris Crime Stories. Paris glittered that night, but only on the surface. The Eiffel Tower glowed like a monument of false promises. Its golden lights reflected in the dark waters of the Seine. The tourists saw beauty. The locals saw history, but Inspector Marc Delacroix saw crime. It was past midnight. When his phone vibrated, a body had been pulled from the river near Pont Neuf. He didn't need the details yet in Paris. The Seine had a way of returning secrets. That people tried to drown Delacroix pulled on his coat. The kind of heavy wool that smelled faintly of cigarettes and rain. His car purred through the near-empty boulevards. Past cafes shuttered for the night, and neon signs buzzing weakly over bars that refused to close. Paris never truly slept, and neither did its sins when he arrived at the riverbank. Blue lights splashed across the stone embankment. The gendarmerie had cordoned off the area, but the crowd was already forming. Late-night drinkers, wandering lovers, and the kind of people drawn to death like moths to flame mail. Mid-40s? The forensic officer reported no ID, bruising around the neck, likely strangled before being dumped. Delacroix crouched near the body. The man's face was pale, swollen from the water. But there was something odd. His right hand clutched a torn fragment of paper carefully. With gloves, Delacroix pried it loose. The words were smudged, but he could make out two lines. Le Cercle, Noir, midnight, belongs to us. The inspector's jaw tightened. Le Cercle Noir, the Black Circle, a name that had vanished from police files 2 decades ago. A secret society, half-rumor, whispered to have controlled parts of Paris's underworld since the 1800s, if they were resurfacing. Paris was in more danger than anyone realized. Cave confessions the next morning. Paris looked deceptively innocent under sunlight. Vendors set up flower stalls near Rue des Rêves. Children chased pigeons at Place des Vaux, and the smell of fresh croissants curled from every corner. Baker, however, wasn't fooled. He sat at his usual cafe on Boulevard Saint-Germain. Notebook open, coffee untouched. The dead man's face haunted him. But it was the message that mattered. The Black Circle hadn't appeared in years. If they were killing again, why now? A shadow fell over his table, still brooding over corpses before breakfast. Marc Delacroix looked up. It was Elise Moreau, an investigative journalist, sharp-witted, and one of the few people who knew how deep Paris's rot went. She slipped into the chair opposite him without waiting for an invitation. "You heard?" he asked. "Bodies and rivers make fast headlines, but what I heard is you found something." Delacroix hesitated. Elise had her own ways of digging into secrets. Some legal, most not. Finally, he slid the damp scrap of paper across the table. She studied it, her brows furrowing. "The Cercle Noir," she whispered. "I thought they were gone." "So did I." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Marc, if they're back, it's not just about crime, it's about power. Political power, financial power. They move like shadows. People disappear. Fortunes collapse. Scandals erupt. And no one traces it to them." Before Delacroix could answer, his phone buzzed again. Another body, this time not in the river, and the words scrawled near it were the same. "Midnight belongs to Usta." Crime scene was a small bookshop near Rue des Martyrs. Its wooden shutters broken, the smell of dust and blood thick in the air. The victim was a woman this time, late 30s. Her body sprawled between toppled stacks of books. Delacroix stood in silence, studying the scene. Unlike the man from the river, this victim hadn't been dumped. She had been displayed on the wall behind her. Written in crimson letters was the same message. "Le Cercle Noir, midnight belongs to us," the forensics officer muttered. "Look staged. Killer wanted it." Seen? Delacroix nodded. But it wasn't just about being seen, it was about being remembered. The Circle was writing their presence back into Paris's story. In blood. Who was she? Delacroix asked. "Owner of the shop, no criminal record." "But..." The officer hesitated. She hosted a literary club every Thursday. Quiet gatherings, mostly academics, historians. Journalists. Delacroix's eyes narrowed. He thought of Elise if the victim had brushed against forbidden truths. Maybe her circle had two echoes of the past that night. Rain slicked the cobblestones as Delacroix and Elise walked along Quai d'Orléans. The city seemed smaller in the downpour. The cathedral towers looming like watchmen. You said the circle had political roots. Delacroix Presidelis nodded, her umbrella tilting against the wind. Yes, in the 1800s. They weren't criminals. They were kingmakers. They manipulated revolutions, toppled ministers, rewrote France's destiny in back rooms over time. They sank deeper into the shadows. Smuggling, assassinations, blackmail. The circle's true power wasn't money, it was control of secrets. And now they're killing again, Delacroix said. Not killing, announcing. Lisa corrected. They want the city to know they're back. Delacroix lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his hardened features. Then, we need to know why. Elise stopped, lowering her voice. There's something else. 20 years ago, I chased a lead on the circle. The name of one man kept surfacing. Etienne Duval, a banker. But before I could publish, he vanished. No body, no trace, just gone. Delacroix flicked his cigarette into the river. Ghosts don't come back, but deep down, he knew in Paris, they sometimes did. Midnight visitors. Delacroix returned home near midnight, his apartment overlooking Place de la République. He had barely poured a glass of wine when he felt it, the subtle wrongness of the air. The silence too heavy. He wasn't alone. Man sat in his armchair, dressed immaculately in black. He looked no older than 40, but his eyes carried centuries on. His finger gleamed a silver ring engraved with a circle. You investigate what should remain hidden, the man said in flawless French. His voice was calm, deliberate, like every syllable was measured. Delacroix's hand slid toward his holster, but the man raised a finger. If we wanted you dead, Inspector, you would be floating in the Seine already. Consider this a courtesy visit. Delacroix didn't move your circle. Noir. The man smiled faintly. We are Paris. We were here before you, and we will remain long after midnight. Belongs to us. And just like that, the man was gone. No door opened, no window creaked. Delacroix was left alone, his wine glass trembling in his hand. Traces of Duval. The next morning, Elise barged into his office with a folder of old clippings. Mark, you're not going to believe this. I found something on Duval. She spread the papers across his desk. Photos of a sharp-featured man with cold eyes, banking articles, society pages, and one grainy picture of Duval shaking hands with a government minister. Duval disappeared in 2005, she said, but 2 weeks ago. He was spotted at a private gala in Montmartre. No press coverage, no guest list, just whispers. Delacroix leaned forward. You think Duval is alive and leading the circle again? Elise's eyes darkened. I don't think I know. Delacroix closed the folder, his decision made. Then, we find him before Paris drowns in blood. The night in Montmartre was alive with music and whispers. The gala was held in a restored 19th century mansion, its chandeliers glowing like captured suns inside. Paris's elite mingled with practiced smiles, bankers, politicians, art dealers, all of them oblivious, or pretending to be, to the quiet power that threaded through the room. Delacroix and Lisa slipped inside, under borrowed invitations. They dressed the part, Lisa in a black evening gown, Delacroix in a tuxedo that felt like armor, but their eyes never stopped scanning it. Didn't take long to find him. Etienne Duval, older, grayer at the temples, but unmistakable. He stood at the center of a circle of admirers, laughing softly, a glass of champagne in hand. Elisa's grip tightened on her clutch. That's him. Delacroix felt his pulse steady, not quicken. Years of police work had taught him that anger was a weapon, but patience was sharper. We need him outside alone, as if sensing their gaze. Duval's eyes lifted across the room for a heartbeat. Their stares locked. Then Duval smiled, not startled, not threatened, but amused. He excused himself and disappeared into the back corridors of the Mansion de la Croix. Followed, the music grew distant, replaced by the echo of footsteps on marble. He turned a corner and found a note pinned to the wall with a silver dagger. You search for ghosts. Midnight will bring them to you. Elise's contacts traced Duval's movements to a private library near Isle St. Louis, a place rumored to house collections too dangerous for public eyes. They arrived past dusk. Breaking in through a side entrance, the smell of dust and ink filled the air. Shelves towering like silent guards. What are we looking for? Elise whispered. Proof. Delacroix replied. Something that ties Duval to the murders. They searched in silence until Lisa gasped. She had found a locked drawer, inside of which lay photographs, grainy surveillance shots of prominent figures. Judges, police chiefs, cabinet ministers, each marked with a symbol of the circle. These are leverage. Elise said. Blackmail archives. This is how they control Paris. But before they could gather more, the library lights flickered, then went out. A voice slithered through the darkness. Inspector? Journalist always digging where you shouldn't. Shadows moved between the aisles, figures in black cloaks, faces hidden, rings glinting. At least 6 of Themeless's hand trembled around her flashlight. Delacroix drew his pistol. Steady. If you wanted us dead, we wouldn't be standing. So what do you want? The leader stepped forward. It was Duval. His voice carried the weight of centuries. We want you to stop. Paris needs order. The circle brings that order. Your truth is chaos. Delacroix didn't lower his weapon. Murder isn't order. Duval's smile was cold sacrifice. Inspector, every empire is built on it. Midnight belongs to us because no one else dares claim it. Before Delacroix could respond, smoke filled the room. By the time it cleared, the circle was gone. The evidence from the library should have been enough to trigger arrests. But when Delacroix presented it to his superiors, the response was chillingly silent. The photos vanished into classified archives. Orders came down from above. Drop the case. He stormed out of the prefecture, rage boiling beneath his controlled exterior. Elise caught up to him outside. They buried it, didn't they? She asked. Delacroix nodded. The circle's reach is deeper than I thought. They own the system. Elise's face hardened. Then we publish, we go to the press. But when she reached her office that evening, the doors were smashed. Her files burned. On her desk sat another silver ring and a single line written in ash. Midnight silences. Liars. Elise's breath shook. They know they're watching me. Delacroix placed a hand on her shoulder. Then we hit back, before they erase us too. The final hour. Paris clock towers struck midnight. The circle had chosen their moment. A private meeting was to be held in the catacombs beneath the city, the ancient labyrinth where bones lined the walls like silent witnesses. Delacroix and Elise descended with only flashlights and nerves of steel. The deeper they went, the colder the air grew. The more the silence pressed, then they heard it, chanting low, rhythmic, echoing through stone corridors. They followed until they reached a vast chamber lit by torches. Dozens of figures in black cloaks stood in a circle around a stone altar. At its center stood Duval. This city has forgotten who guides it, Duval intoned. Tonight we remind them midnight belongs to us. Elise raised her phone, recording, but the flash gave them away. The chanting stopped. Heads turned. Duval's smile returned, sharp as a blade, and so the flies enter the web. The circle closed. Delacroix lifted his pistol. Elise backed toward the wall. The odds were hopeless. 2 against dozens, but fate had a strange sense of timing. Thunder of boots echoed down the corridor. Gendarmerie stormed in, armed and relentless. Elise's live recording had streamed to trusted allies. Before she descended, Paris had seen the world, had seen chaos erupted, cloaked figures scattered, some arrested, some vanishing into tunnels in the center. Duval tried to flee, but Delacroix caught him, pressing the gun to his chest. It's over, Delacroix said. Duval's eyes gleamed. Unafraid, the circle is eternal. You cut off one head, 10 more rise. But as he was dragged away in cuffs, his calm cracked. For the first time, midnight had been claimed by someone else. Dawn over Paris. The sun rose over Paris, painting the Seine gold. The headlines screamed of secret societies, corruption, and arrests. The Black Circle's name was no longer a whisper in the dark. It was a scandal in daylight. Delacroix sat on a bench near Pont Neuf, staring at the river where it had all begun. Elise joined him, her notebook under her arm. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked. Delacroix exhaled smoke. "No, men like Duval don't die in chains. The circle won't vanish. They'll hide, they'll wait." Elise smiled faintly. "Then we wait too, and when they return." Delacroix's eyes hardened. "We'll be ready." Paris breathed again, but in its shadows, something stirred. Midnight might not belong to the circle anymore, but it belonged to no one for long. Circle never sleeps. 3 weeks had passed since the night in the catacombs. Paris had returned to its rhythms, the clink of coffee cups in Saint-Germain, the accordion songs drifting along Montmartre, the tourists pressing against cafe windows to escape the spring rain on the surface. The city was whole again, but Delacroix knew better. The circle wasn't gone. The police parade of arrests had filled the news cycle, but too many faces had slipped away into the underground. Too many files had been quietly sealed, and Duval, despite sitting in a cell at La Santé prison, still carried himself like a man, waiting for his chauffeur. Delacroix had visited him once. He remembered the way Duval leaned across the table, the fluorescent light cutting shadows into his face. "You think you've won, Inspector?" Duval had murmured. "You've only bought time. Power never disappears. It migrates, and when the city sleeps again, will rise where you least expect it. Perhaps in the banks, perhaps in the courts, perhaps closer to your home than you imagine." Delacroix hadn't responded. He had just stared at him, unblinking, until the guards pulled Duval away, but the words lingered now. As he walked along the Seine under the pale morning light, he felt the city differently. The laughter of strangers sounded rehearsed. The glances of passers-by seemed longer, heavier. Every unmarked car on the corner could be a circle lookout. Every silence on the line could be a warning. Delise had thrown herself into her work. Her articles about the circle had shaken the government, forced resignations, ignited debates in the assembly. She had become both hero and target. She joked about the threats, but Delacroix could see the way she checked her locks twice at night, the way she flinched when the phone rang after midnight one evening, over wine in her apartment. She said quietly, "Do you ever wonder if we've only provoked them? If shining light on them makes them stronger?" Delacroix sipped slowly before answering. "Maybe, but Paris doesn't belong to the shadows, not while we're breathing still." As he left that night, he noticed a mark etched into her building's front door, a small circle, freshly scratched into the wood. The circle wasn't gone. They were watching, waiting. And as the bells of Notre Dame tolled midnight, Inspector Delacroix understood the truth. The war for Paris had only just begun. The prison break. La Santé prison was supposed to be impenetrable. Thick walls, steel bars, guards drilled into discipline. Yet, on a damp April night, silence hung heavy in its corridors, a silence that meant one thing in Paris. Something was very wrong by dawn. Etienne Duval was gone. The official story spoke of a riot, a fire in the kitchen, confusion in the smoke, but Inspector Marc Delacroix didn't believe in coincidences. He stood outside the prison gates, cigarette between his fingers, watching the frantic reporters shout questions at officials who offered only. Officer Celise Moreau arrived, notebook in hand. "Well," she said grimly, "the circle doesn't waste time, do they?" Delacroix exhaled a plume of smoke. This wasn't a prison break. This was an extraction. They wanted him back. Elise scribbled something. "Then Paris is about to bleed again." Delacroix crushed the cigarette under his heel. "No, Paris is about to burn." The fire at Montparnasse 2 nights later. Flames devoured an office tower near Montparnasse. Firefighters fought until dawn, but the blaze had already gutted 6 floors. What shocked the city wasn't just the destruction. It was who died inside. A deputy minister of finance, a judge known for investigating corporate fraud, and a journalist, Elise's colleague. The blackened walls of the lobby, sprayed in ash and soot, were the words, "Le Cercle Noir." Midnight belongs to us. The city panicked, newspapers screamed of conspiracies, politicians demanded order. Citizens whispered of revolutionists, stared at the smoke-stained rubble. Her knuckles white mark. They're not hiding anymore. They're declaring war. Delacroix's jaw clenched. Then war is what they'll get. Ghost messages. Delacroix returned home. Past midnight, his apartment was quiet. Too quiet. He checked the locks twice before pouring himself a glass of whiskey. That S, when he noticed it, an envelope on his table, no stamp. No markings, just his name written in black ink inside, was a single photograph. It showed Elise, taken earlier that day. Leaving her office, the message scrawled across the back read, "She speaks too loudly. Midnight will silence her next." Delacroix's hand tightened around the glass until it shattered. He didn't sleep that night. He watched the streets from his window, waiting for shadows that never came, but in his gut, he knew. The circle wasn't just after power anymore. They were coming for him, for her, for anyone who had dared to strip their secrets bare. The cat, and the journalists tell us, refused to hide. That was her first mistake. She still walked to her newsroom in Bastille every morning, still held meetings at cafes, still stood in front of cameras to speak about corruption. But Delacroix noticed the changes. The way she lingered at crosswalks, the way her eyes flicked to every mirror and reflection one evening. Delacroix followed her without asking. He watched her leave the newsroom, her heels clicking against wet cobblestones. She turned down Rue Hamlet, where street lamps buzzed weakly, casting too many shadows. That's when he saw him, a man trailing her, dressed too plainly, moving too carefully. Delacroix's instincts screamed. He closed the distance, pulling Elise into a doorway. Just as the man reached into his cote, pistol flashed. The shot missed. Splintering brick. Delacroix shoved Elise behind him, fired once. Twice the man collapsed, clutching his chest, his weapon skidding across the pavement. Delacroix knelt beside him. The man's lips bled as he whispered, "Midnight sends greetings." Then he went still. Liza's breath was ragged, her face pale. "Mark, they really won't stop." Delacroix holstered his weapon, eyes cold. "Then neither will I." Whispers in the Louvre 2 days later. A contact from Interpol slipped Delacroix a name, a shipment scheduled through the Louvre's underground archives. Disguised as a private art transfer, the Circle had been using cultural institutions as smuggling routes. Paintings in crates hiding documents, sculptures concealing weapons. That night, Delacroix and Elise infiltrated the museum. After hours, the grand halls were empty, shadows stretching over centuries of stolen beauty. In the archives below, they found what they weren't supposed to see, a convoy of men unloading crates, each stamped with the Circle's silver ring symbol. Inside were not artifacts, but ledgers. Liza flipped one open, her eyes widening. "Mark, these are records of payments to politicians, judges, even police chiefs. This is their entire network before they could escape." Alarms wailed. The Circle's guards flooded the hall. Bullets echoed against marble. Delacroix grabbed Elise, dragging her behind a statue of Athena as shards of stone rained down. "Run," he shouted, but Elise didn't. She clutched the ledger tight and whispered, "If we lose this, we lose Paris." So together they fought their way out, sprinting through the moonlit courtyards of the Louvre, chased by shadows that belonged to no century. The ministers bawled. The ledger cracked doors that had been locked for decades. It revealed names, one of them belonging to Minister Armand Leclerc, a man who publicly condemned corruption while privately feeding the Circle's coffers. Leclerc was hosting a masquerade ball at Hotel de Ville, an irony so sharp it cut the Lacroix and Elise went disguised masks. Champagne flutes, forced smiles beneath chandeliers. The city's power brokers laughed. Without shame, Delacroix spotted Leclerc speaking quietly with Duval. Yes, Duval free again, standing as if prison had been a temporary holiday. His silver ring glinted under the light. Liz gripped Delacroix's arm. "We have to expose them." But before they could act, Leclerc raised a toast. His words echoed across the hall. "To Paris, to order, to the eternal midnight that protects us all." The guests clapped. and in that moment, Delacroix understood. Half the room was circle. This wasn't infiltration, it was infestation. He leaned toward Lisa. We're standing in the nest. The chase through ball ended in chaos. Delacroix and Elise slipped out just as masked figures realized the ledger was missing from Elise's bag. They ran through the marais, cobbled streets twisting like a maze behind them. Black-suited men pursued with the patience of hunters' gunshots. Cracked glass, shattered. Elise stumbled, clutching the ledger to her chest. But Delacroix pulled her upright. In here, he barked, shoving open the door of an abandoned warehouse. They ducked behind rusted machinery as footsteps closed in. The circle's hunters fanned out. Their leader, tall and scarred, called into the dark, "Give us the book." Inspector Spare, the journalist. "She doesn't matter." Delacroix fired a warning shot. "You'll take her over my corpse." The hunters advanced. The air smelled of rust and oil, heavy with tension. Then sirens wailed outside. Elise had managed to trigger a distress signal on her phone. Police stormed the warehouse, forcing the circle to scatter as the echoes died. Elise leaned against Delacroix, trembling. "How long do you think we can keep surviving like this?" Delacroix lit a cigarette with steady hands. "As long as Paris needs us." 8. The Priest of Shadows. The ledger revealed a curious name, repeated in coded entries. Father Gabriel. At first, Delacroix thought it was symbolic, but Elise traced it to a real priest who operated out of a crumbling chapel near Ballville. They visited him at dusk. The church smelled of candle wax and mildew. Father Gabriel was thin, his eyes hollow, his cassock frayed. "You shouldn't have come," he rasped. "The circle sees through stone and shadow." Delacroix pressed. "You launder money for them." The priest shook his head. "I absolve them. They confess here to cleanse their hands of blood. They believe God will forgive their empire." Elise leaned forward. "And do you forgive them?" Gabriel's lips trembled. "No, but I fear them more than I fear hell." Before Delacroix could push further, a shot shattered the stained glass window. Gabriel crumpled, blood soaking his cassock through the broken glass. A sniper's shadow melted. Delacroix cursed. Dragging Elise down the circle had silenced another witness, but not before Gabriel's last whisper. "Seek the midnight ledger beneath the opera house." 9. The Phantom Ledger. Paris's opera house was a palace of illusions, velvet curtains, golden balconies, chandeliers heavy as stars, but beneath it stretched catacombs. Few had seen Delacroix and Lisa slipped in after hours, their footsteps echoing through forgotten passages at the heart of the tunnels. They found it, a vault sealed with iron. Inside were dozens of ledgers, older than the one they'd stolen. Alice slipped one open. Her hands shook. "Mark, this goes back to 1830. They've been recording every deal, every bribe, every death for nearly 2 centuries. It was the circle's true history. A map of Paris's corruption, enough to bring down governments, enough to erase the illusion of democracy." Footsteps, cloaked figures filled the tunnel entrance. Duval stepped forward, his silver ring catching the torchlight. "You've walked far enough, Inspector." His voice was silk over steel. "The city doesn't want your truth. It needs its shadows." Delacroix aimed his pistol. Elise clutched the ancient ledger. The air tightened, and in that tense silence, Paris itself seemed to hold its breath. Midnight confrontation. The catacombs beneath the opera house were silent, except for their footsteps. But now silence had weight. Duval stepped forward, flanked by robed figures, whose silver rings gleamed like daggers in torchlight. "Inspector Duval said softly, "You've come far, but you're still too late." Delacroix leveled his pistol. "No one kills Paris in silence while I'm still breathing." Duval smiled. "Paris has always been built on silence, on midnight, and tonight is the night we reclaim it from the shadows." Another figure stepped forward, this one masked, taller, moving with unnatural grace behind them. Dozens of the circle's cloaked disciples emerged. The catacombs became an altar of black lies. Clutched the ledger to her chest. "Mark, we have the proof. We can end them tonight." Duval laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "You don't understand. The ledger is not proof. It's a promise. Paris belongs to those who hold its midnight." The robed figures advanced. Delacroix fired. The shot rang out. Echoing like thunder in stone, chaos erupted. Bullets met steel. Shadows clashed. Torches fell, throwing the chamber into darkness. Through the chaos, Elise shouted, "Mark, the ledger." He dove toward her, shielding her, as they fought toward the exit behind them. Duval's voice called softly, almost in prayer, "Midnight belongs to us." Until the end of days, they burst into the cool night air beneath Place d'Opéra, lungs burning, the city above oblivious to the war that had just been waged beneath its feet. 11. Aftermath. Paris woke. Two headlines that shook the world. The Midnight Ledger. Century of corruption exposed. Ministers resigned. Judges were arrested. Investigations swept through the city. The circle was fractured. Its leaders, scattered. Delacroix watched the sunrise from Pont Neuf. The same glowing gold beside him. Elise held the ledger, its pages still trembling with secrets. "Do you think it's over?" she asked. Delacroix shook his head. "No, the circle isn't gone. It's changed. It will wait, and when midnight calls again." He looked at her with steady resolve. "We'll be ready." Elise closed the ledger, tucking it under her arm. "Then let's make sure the next midnight belongs to Paris, somewhere deep in the shadows of the city." A silver ring caught the morning light, and the war for Paris was far from over. Weeks later, in a quiet cafe in Saint-Germain, Delacroix sipped espresso. Lisa typed the closing lines of her expose, her fingers steady, despite the dangers still lurking in Paris outside. Life carried on. Lovers strolled along the Seine, street musicians played for spare change, and the city hummed with its eternal rhythm. But in the alleys, the dark corners, and the unlit tunnels beneath the streets, the whisper persisted. Midnight belongs to a sand somewhere. The circle was listening. Paris was quieter now, but that stillness was dangerous. Delacroix could feel it in the streets, in the way footsteps echoed too long in narrow alleys, in the way shopkeepers glanced over their shoulders. Elise sat across from him in their safe house. The midnight ledger opened between them like a living thing. Its pages were stained, worn, but its words were sharper than any blade. "They're regrouping," Elise said softly, her eyes scanning her notes. "The circle isn't defeated. They're lying in wait, waiting for the perfect night." Delacroix leaned back, lighting a cigarette. The smoke curled upward, vanishing into the dim light. "Midnight never leaves Paris, it just shifts. And we're about to find out where it will strike next." Outside, Paris breathed on, unaware that the war for its soul was about to begin. The cafes of Saint-Germain were full that morning, the air thick with coffee, steam, and conversation. But Delacroix didn't hear the chatter. His mind was buried in the ledger. Elise's notes scattered around him like fragments of a map to war. "They've been quiet," Elise said, her voice low to quiet. "That means they're preparing something." Delacroix nodded. "Duval doesn't make noise without reason. Silence is his war drum." Their safe house was a small flat in the Marais, unremarkable except for its view of Rue des Rosiers, where the bustle of Paris spilled in like a tide. They had been here for weeks, building a network. Police officers who still believed in justice, journalists who refused to be bought, whistleblowers who carried fragments of truth the circle wanted buried forever. Glanced at a wall covered in maps, photographs, and notes, a spiderweb of connections drawn in red string locations, bridges, catacombs, archives, even the opera house dates, nights marked with a single word scrawled in ink. Midnellis traced one of the lines with her finger. "They're organizing. It's coordinated. This isn't random violence. It's a campaign." Delacroix pressed his palm to the wall. "We need to know where it will begin before midnight comes again." At that moment, Elise's phone vibrated. She glanced at it. Frowning, her face paled. "It's a message, no sender, just one line. The city sleeps, we do not." Delacroix's jaw tightened. Then we're already too late outside. The city moved on, unaware that a storm was forming in its shadows, a storm that would drown Paris in midnight. The message Elise had received burned in her mind all day. "The city sleeps, we do not." She replayed it again as they worked through the Ledger de Lacroix. sat beside her in the safe house, running his fingers through the tangled web of their investigation. They had identified dozens of potential targets, judges, politicians, media figures. They were all connected to Circle. Paris was quiet that night, but underneath the streets, something was moving. It began with an explosion, not a roar, but a slow shudder beneath the city. In the 11th era, a government communications hub was reduced to rubble. Emergency sirens filled the air as the ground trembled. News spread quickly. No warning, no claim of responsibility, but Elise knew who it was before anyone spoke. They're testing their reach, she said, and they've chosen the first night of their campaign. Delacroix nodded grimly. Then we need to find Duval and stop this before it becomes a war. That night they followed a lead to a small warehouse in the industrial district of Bercy. Inside they found stacks of crates filled with weapons, explosives, and a silver ring engraved with the circle's symbol A. Whisper of wind brushed past them, carrying a voice from the shadows. Midnight belongs to us. They didn't see who spoke, but they knew the war had begun, for the web titans Delacroix and Elise spent the next days chasing fragments of truth through Paris. The circle had allies everywhere, police precincts, government offices, even the press. Every clue they found was met with another lock, another silence. They turned to their network. A young hacker known as Lynx uncovered encrypted communications buried in public archives. The messages pointed toward a single date. Bastille Day. Delacroix rubbed his temple. Bastille Day. That's not coincidence, that's a statement. Elise leaned over him, her finger tracing the calendar date. And it's the perfect night. A holiday, crowds, chaos. They could cripple the city in one strike. They knew they had to act fast. Their only chance was to infiltrate the circle's meeting place and learn their plan before best day. Their search led them to an abandoned theater in Belleville, a forgotten building, rumored to host underground gatherings. Inside, cloaked figures moved like ghosts through the dim light. They overheard whispers of the night of midnight and the fall of the city before they could react. A trapdoor slammed behind them. They were surrounded. Duval stepped into view, his smile calm, almost kind. You should have stayed in your shadows, Inspector. Now you will see the city burn. Gunfire erupted. Delacroix pulled Elise into cover. The room exploded in chaos as the circle's disciples closed in. They escaped through the catacombs, the echoes of footsteps and whispers following them into the night. 5. The city had risked 2 nights before Bastille Day. Paris was tense. Guards patrolled the streets in greater numbers. The media reported minor explosions and cyber attacks. Panic quietly took root. Delacroix and Elise worked around the clock, piecing together Duval's plan from the fragments of intercepted communications and the ledger. It became clear the circle intended to collapse Paris's infrastructure in one-stroke. Power grids, communication lines, transportation hubs, all targeted simultaneously. Bastille Day, when the city would be filled with citizens, would be the perfect stage for their final statement. Elise laid the ledger open before Delacroix. This isn't just war, this is an erasure. They want to rebuild Paris under their control. Delacroix clenched his fists. Then we stop them tonight. They gathered their allies, the hacker Lynx, a disgraced police captain, and a small band of whistleblowers together. They planned to infiltrate the circle's headquarters before Bastille Day and dismantle the operation. But they knew the risk. Every step was a step into the lion's den. 6. The night of midnight, Bastille Day arrived, with the city unaware of the storm waiting. In its veins, fireworks painted the night sky. Crowds thronged the avenues, and Elise moved through the chaos. Dressed in black, their target was the Theatre des Ombres, the heart of the circle's operation. Hidden beneath it were tunnels older than Paris itself. They descended into the catacombs, their path lit by the glow of handheld lamps. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. Somewhere in the dark, whispers echoed a chant in a language older than the Republic. At the heart of the catacombs, they found Duval. He stood before a circle of disciples, The midnight ledger open on a stone altar around them. Monitors displayed maps, communications feeds, and countdown timers. It begins tonight. Duval, intoned midnight, belongs to us. Delacroix stepped forward. Not if I have anything to say about it. Gunfire erupted, chaos consumed the chamber. Shadows clashed, the air filled with smoke, shouting, and the sound of metal striking stone. Delacroix fought his way toward Duval, while Elise seized the ledger and streamed its contents to every news network in Paris. The city was waking up through the smoke. Duval laughed. You can stop me, but you cannot stop midnight. Delacroix reached Duval, pressing his pistol to his temple. I'm ending this tonight. 8 shot rang out 7. Dawn over Paris. The battle was over before sunrise. The Theatre des Ombres was silent, except for the sound of dripping water and heavy breathing. Duval lay bound, wounded. In Delacroix's custody, the Circle's disciples had vanished. Paris awoke to headlines, screaming of conspiracy, war, and revolution. The midnight ledger was public government's collapsed. Protests filled the streets. The Circle was fractured beyond repair. Delacroix stood on Pont Neuf, watching the same glow under the rising sun. Elise joined him, her face tired but resolute. Do you think it's over? She asked. Delacroix shook his head. No. Midnight will return, but Paris is awake now, and so are we. A silver ring glinted in the distance, a reminder that the war for midnight was never truly finished. Paris had survived, but the city's shadows would always whisper. The dawn was pale and cold over Paris, and the city stirred with a strange new breath. The Arc de Triomphe stood silent under the morning fog. The Seine ran black under bridges, carrying the weight of secrets no one dared speak aloud in Pont Neuf. Delacroix and Elise stood side by side. The ledger was gone now, taken by the state, preserved in secrecy. Its pages marked as evidence in an inquiry that would shake governments, but neither of them believed that it was the end. Lies lit a cigarette. The smoke curled upward like a question mark. Do you think they're finished? Delacroix exhaled slowly. The Circle isn't an organization, it's an idea. Midnight isn't something you destroy, you just survive it. Behind them, in the cafe, across the street, a man in a dark coat sipped coffee, his hand brushed against the inside of his jacket. Where a silver ring glinted in the light, he looked toward them, and for a moment, his eyes reflected something older than power. Patience. Delacroix noticed him. His hand went to his coat pocket, instinctively, but the man was gone before he could move. Only the hum of the city remained. Elise crushed her cigarette underfoot and whispered, We stopped them, but not all of them. Delacroix's gaze drifted toward the river. Paris will never stop hiding its shadows. Midnight will always return, and somewhere in the city, deep beneath cobblestones, tunnels, and centuries-old stone, a whisper traveled between men who had sworn silence. Midnight belongs to Usta. City breathed on. Paris was alive, and the war for its soul was far from over. The curtain fell, but the stage was never empty. Paris breathed in silence that morning, as if the city itself was holding its breath. The cafes opened their shutters. Children chased pigeons across the square, and the Seine glistened like a dark promise. But beneath the streets, in tunnels older than memory, something stirred. Delacroix lit his last cigarette and glanced toward Lisa, her eyes fixed on the ledger like it contained the fate of the world. They'll come again, he murmured. Midnight never sleeps outside. A shadow moved along the riverbank, unseen, but watching. Delacroix crushed the cigarette under his heel. The faint hiss of embers lost in the city's hum. Elise closed the ledger gently, her breath slow but tense, as if she could already feel the storm gathering. We've fought them twice, she said softly, but this time, it feels different. He studied her face, the faint tremor in her hand somewhere deep beneath Paris, in the stone veins of the city. The Circle was stirring again, and Delacroix knew the next night would not be a warning, it would be the reckoning. The days that followed were a haze of planning, fear, and movement in the shadows. Paris seemed unchanged. Cafes still buzzed, The Seine still curved gracefully under bridges. Street musicians still played in the metro, but Delacroix and Elise knew better. They had seen the writing under the surface, the ledger. Elise still clutched in her bag was their map. Their key. It was no longer just proof. It was a warning carved in centuries of conspiracy. The Circle was preparing something enormous. Bastille Day was the target. But no one knew what exactly. They gathered their allies in a forgotten warehouse in the Marais. Lynx, the young hacker, with a patch over one eye. Captain Morel, a disgraced police officer who still carried a badge in his pocket. And Marie, a journalist who had lost her family to the Circle's schemes. They were small in number, but fierce in will. Delacroix spread the ledger open on a crate. These markings, their coordinates. He tapped the page. They lead to places under the city tunnels. Chambers. Forgotten catacombs. The Circle controls them all. Lynx leaned forward, eyes scanning the map there, planning something inside the city itself. Something massive if they hit on Bastille Day. It won't be just chaos, it'll be war. Elise closed the ledger with a snap. Then we go to the heart of it. Tonight, Delacroix looked toward her. The streetlight filtering through the dusty warehouse windows. Tonight, we decide if Paris wakes or falls asleep forever. 5. Into the catacombs. Entrance was hidden in plain sight, a disused cellar door behind an abandoned cafe in Beauville. It smelled of mildew and history. The scent of stone untouched for decades. Delacroix led the way, pistol drawn, the rest following quietly. The tunnels beneath Paris stretched like veins in the dark. The only light came from their lamps, cutting the blackness into narrow cones somewhere deep inside. The walls pulsed with silence, an ancient silence heavier than stone after hours of moving. They came to a chamber carved from limestone. In the center was an altar, and on it lay another ledger, older, bound in cracked leather. The midnight ledger's predecessor. Eliza's hand trembled as she touched it. This is centuries old. It's everything before they could examine it further. Movement flickered in the shadows. Cloaked figures stepped forward, their faces hidden. Duval emerged last. Calm, wearing his silver ring. You should have stopped here, Inspector, he said softly, but you've gone too deep now. You will see midnight in full. Delacroix leveled his pistol. Not if I stop you first. The air went still. Then came the sound of footsteps echoing from every tunnel. They were surrounded. 6. Blood on Bastille Day. Bastille Day arrived with celebration and ignorance. Paris filled with crowds, and red, white, and blue fireworks rose over the city, masking the silent war underground. Delacroix and Elise moved like shadows, slipping through barricades, avoiding cameras. They had no choice. The Circle had eyes everywhere. Their mission was clear: find Duval before midnight and destroy the ledger he planned to use to unleash chaos. They reached the Théâtre des Ombres, the hidden heart of the Circle's network. Beneath it, the catacombs opened into a vast chamber, illuminated by torches and screens showing maps, documents, and countdown clocks. Duval stood at the center, surrounded by his disciples, chanting softly in a language that curled the skin. Tonight, Duval intoned, midnight returns to Paris, and it will rule forever. Delacroix stepped forward. Not while I breathe. Gunfire broke the silence. Shadows collided with gunfire. Steel rang against stone, and smoke filled the air. Delacroix fought his way toward Duval, Elise clutching the ledger tightly, broadcasting the scene live to the world above. The world woke in real time. Paris screamed. 7. The reckoning. The battle was chaos incarnate, echoes of war in the city's heart. Duval moved with calm precision, every step measured, but Delacroix was relentless. They clashed at the altar. Pistols flashed. Duval's voice was steel. Paris belongs to midnight. Delacroix pressed his pistol. Not anymore. The shot rang out. Duval fell. The chanting stopped. The disciples fled into the catacombs, leaving only the sound of dripping water and heavy breathing. Lacroix lowered his weapon. Chest heaving, Elise stood beside him, the ledger now in her hands. Outside, Paris's fireworks still lit the sky, oblivious to the war that had been fought. Beneath them 8. Dawn of Truth by Sunrise. Paris was changed. The ledger's contents were public. Governments fell. Protests erupted. The circle was fractured. Its leaders in hiding or arrested. But the city still held its shadows. Delacroix stood at Pont Neuf, looking toward the river. Elise joined him quietly. "Do you think it's over?" she asked. "No," he said softly. "Midnight never ends. It just changes form." Elise nodded. "Then we have to be ready for the next night." The Seine flowed beneath them, carrying secrets into the dawn. Somewhere in the shadows, a silver ring caught the light. The war for Paris had ended, but midnight still whispered. Weeks later, in a quiet cafe in Saint-Germain, Delacroix sipped espresso. Lisa typed the closing lines of her expose, her fingers steady, despite the danger still lurking in Paris outside. Life carried on. Lovers strolled along the Seine. Street musicians played for spare change, and the city hummed with its eternal rhythm. But in the alleys, the dark corners, in the unlit tunnels beneath the streets, the whisper persisted. Midnight belongs to a sand somewhere. The circle was listening. The curtain fell, but the stage was never empty. Paris seemed unaware of the war beneath its streets. Morning sunlight spilled across Place de la Concorde. Children ran after pigeons, and cafes filled with laughter. But in the heart of the city, the pulse of something darker was growing stronger. Delacroix and Elise worked tirelessly in the safe house, tracing coordinates, decrypting passages from the ledger, and mapping movements of the circle. Every lead pointed toward Bastille Day, a date marked in Duval's notes with a single word: finale. The air in the room was heavy. Lynx, hunched over his laptop, broke the silence. "They've moved their meeting underground, deeper than the catacombs. We're talking layers of history the city doesn't even remember. They're preparing something massive." Delacroix's face tightened. "How do we stop something we can't even see?" Elise closed the ledger. Her voice was quiet but determined. "We don't stop it. We stop them tonight." They gathered their allies again, a ragged band of journalists, whistleblowers, and disgraced officers, willing to risk everything. Each of them knew what they were walking into: a confrontation that could destroy Paris or save it. At dusk, they slipped out of the safe house, moving through the city in silence. Their destination was the Theatre des Ombres, the circle's heart, somewhere in those stone veins, under the city's sleeping streets. Midnight was waiting. 10. Descent. The entrance to the theater was hidden beneath a forgotten cafe in Belleville, concealed by a trapdoor coated in centuries of dust. Delacroix pried it open. The air was cold and stale, carrying the scent of damp stone and old secrets. They descended slowly, lights cutting narrow paths in the darkness. Every step seemed heavier, as if the city itself resisted their passage. The deeper they went, the more the silence became oppressive. At last, they arrived at a vast chamber. Torches burned in a circle around a stone altar. In its center lay the ledger, older than the one Elise carried, bound in cracked leather and etched with runes older than the city itself around it. Robed figures chanted softly. Duval stepped into view, his silver ring catching the light. His smile was calm, almost serene. "Welcome, Inspector. You've come far, but not far enough." Delacroix leveled his pistol. "This ends tonight." Duval shook his head. "No, this is only the beginning." From the shadows came the sound of footsteps. Hundreds of them, cloaked disciples, emerged from hidden tunnels. The chamber filled with chanting. Somewhere, deep below Paris, the clock struck midnight. 11. Midnight war gunfire broke the silence. Shadows clashed in torchlight. Delacroix moved with precision. Elise beside him, clutching the ledger around them. Chaos devoured the chamber. Duval stood at the altar, chanting louder. The words echoed through the catacombs, vibrating in stone. His voice carried power, not just of men, but of centuries of secrecy. Delacroix fought his way toward him, his pistol steady despite the blood on his hands. Elise streamed the scene live, the ledger's pages visible to the world above. "Paris wakes now," Elise whispered into her microphone. Duval's eyes met hers, then let midnight rise. Delacroix reached the altar, Time slowed. He fired. The chamber fell silent. 12. Dawn of truth. Paris awoke to chaos. The ledger was public. Governments shook. Protests filled the streets. The circle was fractured. Duval was gone. His fate unknown. Lacroix and Elise stood on Pont Neuf as the first light broke over the Seine behind them. The city moved on, unaware of the war that had been fought beneath idolize. Looked at Delacroix. Do you think it's over? He shook his head slowly. Midnight never ends. It only sleeps, and Paris will always dream somewhere beneath the city. In tunnels older than memory, a whisper traveled through stone. Midnight belongs to us. The curtain fell. But the stage was never empty. The streets of Paris were still alive, hours after Bastille Day had ended. But the city carried a different breath. The fireworks had faded. The crowds dispersed. The cafes and bars reopened under pale morning light. Unaware that the war had been fought beneath them, Delacroix and Elise returned to the safe house. In silence, the ledger rested between them, its leather cover cracked and worn, its pages stained with centuries of blood and shadow outside. The city was waking, oblivious to how close it had come to losing itself. Interiela spoke first. We've exposed them. The ledger is out. But they'll regroup. Midnight doesn't end with a shot. Delacroix stared at the ledger, his fingers brushing the worn cover. It doesn't. Midnight is a part of the city now, a part of Paris, and so are we. The safe house door creaked open. Captain Morel stepped inside, his face pale. There's something you need to see. He handed them a small, worn box. Inside lay a silver ring, identical to the one Duval had worn, but this one was older, carved with runes. Even the ledger could not explain. Lacora's eyes narrowed. This isn't over. Elise closed the ledger and stood. Then we make sure we're ready for when midnight comes again. 14. Echoes beneath the city that night. Delacroix walked alone along the Seine. The bridges reflected the pale light of the moon. The city breathed quietly, but he could still feel it. The pulse of the underground. The hum of a war that had never truly ended. Somewhere in the catacombs, cloaked figures gathered. Their whispers carried through the stone corridors. A language older than Paris itself. The silver ring glinted in torchlight. The midnight ledger rested in their hands. A voice, soft but filled with certainty, spoke. Midnight belongs to us. Above them, the city slept, but beneath, the war continued. Delacroix closed his eyes. Somewhere in the darkness, a promise lingered that Paris would never be free of midnight, and perhaps it never should be. Epilogue. Paris remembers. Weeks later, Paris had moved on. Tourists strolled along the Seine. Cafes overflowed. The city hummed with life, but in the corridors of power, whispers persisted. In cafes, in the catacombs, in the hearts of those who remembered, a question remained. Who truly controls midnight? Delacroix and Elise stood on Pont Neuf at dawn, watching the city breathe. Elise said softly, "We fought for the truth, but the truth isn't free." Delacroix nodded. Paris was never ours to protect. It belongs to midnight now. A shadow moved in the mist, and for a moment, both of them saw it. A figure cloaked in black, wearing a silver ring, watching from across the river. The whisper came again, carried on the wind. Midnight belongs to us, and Paris kept breathing. Delacroix stood in silence on the Pont Neuf, the first light of dawn, washing the Seine in pale gold. Elise beside him folded the ledger and tucked it into her coat, her eyes scanning the city as if searching for a hidden threat in every shadow somewhere beneath their feet. The catacombs pulsed with memory, a slow heartbeat of stone and secrecy. Delacroix exhaled, a breath lost to the morning air, and murmured, "Midnight doesn't die, it sleeps." And waits. Elise's gaze met his, steady but haunted, as a lone figure in black disappeared into the mist, leaving nothing but the echo of a whisper. Midnight belongs to us. Delacroix stood on the Pont Neuf, the Seine beneath him dark and endless, reflecting the pale gold of the dawn. The city was quiet now, but Paris never truly slept. Somewhere in its bones, beneath its streets and stone, a war still pulsed. Elise folded the ledger carefully and tucked it into her coat. her fingers lingering on its worn leather. She glanced toward him, her expression unreadable. "We've won the night," she said softly. Delacroix did not answer. His eyes stayed on the mist curling along the river, where a shadow moved and vanished before he could name it. Somewhere deep below the city, something breathed, not air, but the weight of centuries. The catacombs held their own memory, a memory written in stone and silence, a memory that was still alive. The city around them stirred. The cafe on the corner opened its shutters, the scent of fresh bread and coffee spilling into the street. A street vendor swept the pavement, and a woman with a child paused at the bridge to look out over the water. Life went on, unaware that the war for Paris had just been fought, and Vitalis shifted beside him, her breath visible in the cool morning air. "Do you think it's over?" she asked. Delacroix's hand tightened around his coat pocket, where the pistol rested. "No, midnight doesn't end," he said quietly. "It sleeps and waits." She nodded, folding her scarf tighter against the chill. "Then what do we do?" "We watch," he replied. "We wait until it wakes again." A sudden noise behind them made both turn. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. They came from the far end of the bridge, muffled by the morning hum of the city. Delacroix's hand went instinctively to his pistol. Elise stepped closer, her eyes scanning the figure that emerged from the mist. The man was tall, cloaked in black, his face hidden beneath the shadow of a hood. On his finger glinted the silver ring, identical to Duval's. For a moment, they stared at each other in silence. The man said nothing, only stepped backward, melting into the fog. Delacroix exhaled slowly, his gaze following the retreating figure. "It's not over," he said again. The city breathed around them. Somewhere deep beneath the streets, in the labyrinth of forgotten tunnels and stone corridors, the whisper came again. "Midnight belongs to us." That whisper was not carried by the wind, it was carried by the city itself. 14. Beneath the city that evening, the two returned to the safe house. The ledger sat on the table between them like a silent witness. Elise opened it again, her fingers brushing over the inked symbols, the coordinates, the strange runes etched in margins that neither of them had been able to decipher. "There's more here," she said. "Something we missed." Delacroix leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "What is it?" She shook her head. "I don't know, but this isn't just a record of events. It's a map, and it's not complete." He studied the ledger in silence, the weight of it heavy in the quiet room somewhere in Paris. The circles still moved somewhere. The war was far from over that night. Delacroix could not sleep. He walked the streets, tracing the sound of his own footsteps. Paris felt alive in a way it had never felt before. Not the hum of normal life, but something deeper, older, darker. Beneath the city, something waited. The catacombs. 15. The hidden chamber. 2 nights later, guided by the coordinates in the ledger, they returned to the catacombs. The entrance was hidden beneath an abandoned chapel in Montmartre, concealed by rubble and centuries of silence. They descended slowly, each step echoing in the stone corridors. Deeper and deeper they went, the air growing colder, heavier. Their lights revealed walls carved with symbols they had never seen, runes that seemed to shift in the flickering torchlight. At last, they came to a chamber, larger than any they had seen before. Stone columns rose like giants around them. At its center stood an altar carved from marble, and upon it lay another ring, the twin of Duval's. Beside it was a scroll, bound in iron. Ace reached for the scroll, her breath catching this. "This is the heart of it." Delacroix placed a hand on her shoulder. "Whatever this is, it's bigger than us." A sound came from behind them, footsteps in the dark. They turned, but saw nothing. The air grew colder still, and a whisper came again, carried through stone and silence. "Midnight belongs to us." 16. The last battle. The following night, Paris was asleep. Delacroix, Elise, and their allies gathered quietly at the entrance to the chamber. They knew the circle would come for the ring and the scroll. It was the heart of their power. When the first cloaked figure stepped through the darkness, gunfire erupted. The catacombs shook with the clash of steel and shadow. Torches splintered. Shouts echoed through stone corridors. Duval emerged at last, his silver ring glowing faintly in the torchlight. "You should have left the city to sleep," he said calmly, "but you came for war, and now you have it." Delacroix stepped forward, pistol drawn. "This ends tonight." Duval smiled faintly. "Midnight never ends." The chamber exploded into chaos. 17. Dawn. When the fighting stopped, the chamber was silent. Duval was gone. The ring and the scroll were destroyed. The ledger lay open, its pages scattered above ground. Paris awoke to the first light of morning. The city breathed again. But it was not the same somewhere in the depths. The war still lived. Delacroix and Elise stood on the Pont Neuf, watching the Saint. Elise folded the last page of the ledger and tucked it away. "Do you think we won?" she asked. Delacroix shook his head. "We've only delayed it. Midnight is part of the city now. It will return." A shadow moved in the mist along the riverbank. A silver ring glinted briefly before disappearing. The whisper came again. "Midnight belongs to us." Paris exhaled. The stage was never empty. The city was still when Delacroix returned to Pont Neuf. That night the Seine glistened under pale moonlight, its surface broken only by ripples from a passing boat. Paris was quiet, but the silence was heavy, like a breath held till Angelis joined him without a word. Her coat pulled tight against the cold. Between them lay the ledger, now sealed in a leather case, its edges frayed from centuries of hands turning its pages. They had fought to expose it, to destroy the power it held, but something in the air told Delacroix they had only scratched the surface. They stood for a long moment, watching the city somewhere in the distance. Church bells rang midnight. The sound rolled over the rooftops, deep and slow, echoing in the stillness. Delacroix broke the silence. "Midnight isn't over. It never is." Elise looked at him, her eyes sharp. "Then what do we do?" He did not answer immediately. He looked down at the Seine, the river like liquid shadow. "We stay awake," he said finally. "We guard the city, because midnight is patient, and it always returns behind them." The bridge creaked softly. Delacroix turned, just in time to see movement in the mist. A tall figure cloaked in black, stepping lightly into view. On his hand glinted a silver ring, the same ring they had fought against. He did not speak. He did not move further. He simply stood there, watching them. Then, without warning, he stepped back into the fog and vanished. Elise shivered. "Who was that?" Delacroix said nothing. His eyes stayed on the spot where the figure had been, somewhere beneath them. Under centuries of stone and silence, the city seemed to breathe. "They whisper," came again, soft but certain, carried on the night air. "Midnight belongs to us." They stood there in silence, watching the Seine. The city behind them was still asleep, unaware of the war that had been fought, and the one that was yet to come. Paris belonged to midnight now, and so did they. Final scene echoes weeks later. The ledger rested in a locked vault, guarded by those who had survived the battle. Delacroix returned to his apartment, the streets below alive with life. He lit a cigarette, watching the city from his window. Lise was beside him, her eyes on the street. "Do you think we changed anything?" she asked. He exhaled smoke, letting it drift toward the ceiling. "We delayed it. We gave Paris a choice. But midnight doesn't disappear. It only changes form." From somewhere in the distance came the faintest sound, the echo of footsteps in stone corridors. Deep beneath the city, they listened on. Then, carried on the wind, came the whisper once again. "Midnight belongs to us." Delacroix turned to Elise. She nodded, as if sharing the same thought. The city slept, but somewhere in its heart, the war was far from over. And Paris remembered. Paris is a city built on secrets. Beneath its beauty lies a hidden world, a war fought in silence, in tunnels, and in shadowed chambers. Older than the Republic. Paris Crime Stories is a noir crime saga in 3 acts, following Inspector Marc Delacroix and journalist Elise Moreau as they uncover a centuries-old conspiracy, a secret order known as the Circle, and a war for the soul of the city itself. The war begins. Delacroix discovers a mysterious ledger filled with coordinates, names, and cryptic runes pointing to a secret order. that has shaped Paris for centuries. Joined by Elise, they chase clues through the cobblestone streets, forgotten catacombs, and gilded salons of Paris. They confront Duval, the enigmatic leader of the Circle. Beneath the city, in a battle that leaves questions unanswered, the ledger is recovered, but the Circle remains at large. A shadow that refuses to vanish. The conspiracy deepens. Duval escapes, and the Circle regroups. Delacroix and Elise follow the trail deeper into Paris' hidden underworld. Confronting betrayal, corruption, and violence, the war spreads, not just in the streets, but in the heart of power itself. In a masquerade of politics and deception, they discover the Circle's plan for Bastille Day. Their confrontation beneath the opera house exposes part of the truth, but Duval escapes again, leaving the ledger incomplete, and the city vulnerable. The final battle guided by the incomplete ledger. Delacroix and Elise descend deeper than ever into the catacombs. They uncover the heart of the Circle's power, an altar older than Paris itself, where midnight is kept as a living thing as Bastille Day approaches. They gather allies for a final assault on the theater day. Ambers, the chamber erupts. In violence, Duval falls. The ledger is exposed, and the Circle is fractured. But the war does not end. Paris awakens to a fragile peace, while somewhere beneath its streets, the whisper persists. The morning air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of fresh rain over the cobblestone streets of Paris, where the city seemed to awaken slowly. Under a pale silver light that filtered through a thick veil of mist, shops were just beginning to stir, their wooden shutters rattling softly as they opened for the day. And cafes on quiet corners exhaled the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm bread, mingling with the faint perfume of wet stone and moss that clung to the old walls of the city. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled once, deep and deliberate, resonating across the rooftops and curling softly toward the Seine, which lay like a dark ribbon through the heart of the city, shimmering with the reflection of awakening street lamps and the slow rise of dawn along the narrow alleys of the Marais. Footsteps echoed softly, the sound of a solitary figure moving beneath the shadow of centuries-old stone. He wore a long coat, heavy with rain, collar turned upward, his breath faintly visible in the cool air. His eyes flickered with something unreadable as he passed beneath the faint glow of a lamp, the light catching a silver ring on his hand so it gleamed like a whisper of promise around him. Paris seemed to breathe softly, the hum of life just beginning to stir, as if the city itself knew this was no ordinary morning. Somewhere in the cobblestone veins of Paris, in the forgotten passages beneath its streets, silence lay thick like dust, guarding secrets older than the Republic itself. And in that silence, a whisper waited through the course of the day. The streets grew alive with movement, the gentle clatter of cafe cups, the murmur of voices in the marketplace, the faint creak of wooden shutters opening to reveal stalls spilling with fresh fruit, flowers, and bread still warm from ovens. People moved briskly, wrapped in scarves, their footsteps quick against the stone. But the figure in the coat remained apart, moving in shadow, passing unnoticed through the bustle. The world above ground was vivid with life, but below, in the labyrinth of catacombs, tunnels stretched like the veins of some ancient living thing, their walls carved with runes and symbols that no scholar had ever explained. And somewhere deep beneath, a door stood, its wood aged to blackness, sealed with iron, whispering of things not meant to be found by noon. The rain had faded, leaving a sheen across every stone and puddle, and the city shone like polished marble under the soft light. Market stalls hummed with trade, the air alive with chatter, laughter, and the distant strains of music drifting from an accordion in the place. De la Concorde children ran along narrow streets, their shoes splashing in puddles, their laughter weaving through the hum of the city. But the man in the coat moved without haste, stepping away from the noise, slipping through narrow passageways that led toward forgotten quarters, toward places where the light could not reach. Every step he took seemed purposeful, each movement deliberate, as if drawn by an unseen force. guiding him toward the heart of the city, where midnight still slept. The hours past afternoon gave way to evening, and the light softened to gold and rose, before fading into the deep indigo of twilight. Lamps flickered to life along the Seine, casting warm glows that danced on wet stone, and the city began to hum with a quieter rhythm. One of anticipation, the figure in the coat paused on a bridge overlooking the water, his eyes scanning the streets below as if searching for something. Or someone. The silver ring on his hand caught the light again, and for a moment the air seemed to still somewhere beneath. In the vast hidden chambers of the catacombs, a whisper rose again, soft and certain, curling through stone. Midnight belongs to us. Night fell fully. Paris breathed under the shadow of history, its streets now quieter, save for the occasional tram, the distant laughter of a late cafe, and the whisper of footsteps that seemed to come from nowhere in the depths beneath the city. The tunnels pulsed with an unseen life. The man in the coat descended, the iron door before him yielding under his touch, opening into darkness so absolute it seemed to devour light itself. The air was colder here, heavier, carrying the scent of stone and earth, of history and silence. He moved with certainty, guided by the map in the ledger he carried, the leather cover cracked with age, the runes glowing faintly under the torchlight he carried. The tunnels wound deeper, curling beneath the city in ways no map could capture, until at last he reached a chamber unlike any other, vast, carved from living stone, lit by torches that burned without flame, and in its center, an altar upon which lay an object older than memory. Glowing faintly, the midnight ledger. The man stepped forward, feeling the pull of centuries in the air around him. Every sound in the catacomb was swallowed. Every breath slowed. His fingers brushed the ledger's cover, and the whisper came again, louder this time, wrapping around him. Midnight belongs to us. He opened the book, and as he did, the chamber seemed to shift. Shadows lengthened, runes glowed brighter, and a presence filled the air, ancient, patient. Watching somewhere above, Paris slept, unaware of the war being waged beneath its streets, and in that moment, the man in the coat understood. Midnight was not just a time, midnight was a promise. And promises never died. The air in the chamber thickened, as if the stone itself exhaled, and the man in the coat hesitated, the weight of the ledger in his hands anchoring him to the moment. His fingers traced the worn edges of the leather, feeling the faint grooves of symbols no scholar had ever deciphered. The torchlight flickered across the pages, revealing diagrams and lines of ink written in a language older than the city. A script that seemed to hum softly under his touch, somewhere deep in the silence. Beneath the breathing of stone, a slow rhythm began, a cadence like footsteps. Though nothing moved but shadows, he looked up and saw them. Figures cloaked in black, their faces hidden beneath hoods. Their presence silent yet absolute. They emerged from the darkness at the edges of the chamber, stepping forward as if drawn by the opening of the ledger. The man in the coat did not speak. He closed the book carefully, the sound of the leather snapping shut echoing like a gunshot. In the vastness, a figure stepped closer, their ring glinting faintly in the torchlight, the same silver ring he had glimpsed before on the Pont Neuf. There was no need for words. The presence between them was a conversation older than time, carried without speech somewhere in the distance. From deep within the stone corridors came a sound, a low hum, vibrating through the floor, the walls, the air. It was the sound of midnight waking. He stepped back, his boots silent against the stone floor, his eyes scanning the chamber. Each torch seemed to flare and dim in unnatural rhythm, casting shadows that writhed and shifted. The cloaked figures circled slowly, enclosing him, their movement like the turning of a great clock. The ledger pulsed faintly in his hands, the ink glowing, as if it recognized the moment had come. A whisper rose again, louder now, threading through the air. Midnight belongs to Huge raised his head, meeting the gaze of the figure nearest him. In that glance was an understanding, not of victory, not of surrender, but of inevitability, somewhere above. Paris continued, its life unaware, but beneath it, the city's true heart beat strong and unyielding. The figure extended a gloved hand toward him, offering the ring. It gleamed with a strange light. As if forged from the essence of shadow itself, the man hesitated. He knew the choice before him would change everything. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft hum of the chamber. Then he took the ring the instant his fingers closed around it. The world seemed to shift. The stone walls pulsed like flesh. The air thickened into something almost liquid, and the chanting of the cloaked figures began, slow at first. Then, rising in power and intensity, the torchlight flared to brilliance, revealing in full the altar, the ledger, and the ring. All three seemed bound together in a single heartbeat of darkness. The man felt it then, the truth of midnight. It was not merely an hour, it was a force, older than any city, older than any law. A living will that had slept for centuries beneath Paris and now stirred again. The whisper became a chorus, the words clear and certain. Midnight belongs to us above ground. The city shifted. Two lights flickered across Paris as if touched by the same unseen hand somewhere. A bell tolled again, deep and resonant, echoing across rooftops and streets. And in that sound was the promise of something new, something ancient reborn. The man in the coat stepped forward, past the altar, the ledger now closed at his side, the ring upon his finger behind him. The cloaked figures parted, their presence fading into the stone shadows. He walked toward the stair that led upward, toward the city. Every step was certain, every breath was heavy with knowledge. The catacombs behind him closed softly, as though swallowing the moment whole. He emerged into the streets of Paris, the air warm now, the mist lifting, revealing the city alive and breathing in the first hours of dawn above him. The sky was pale gold, and somewhere distant a church bell tolled again. Paris was waking, but beneath its streets, in the silence of forgotten stone, the heart of midnight still pulsed, and somewhere a whisper lingered. Midnight belongs to us. The man in the coat disappeared into the city, his footsteps lost among the waking hum of life. The Seine flowed quietly beside him, carrying the reflections of lamplight and dawn, and in those reflections was the memory of what had passed below. Paris moved on, as it always did, carrying in its veins the blood of centuries, the weight of secrets, and the breath of midnight. And the city knew midnight was patient. Midnight was eaten. Alpha. Streets of Paris had begun to stir as the man in the coat walked away. Yet, the echo of what lay beneath the city remained, lingering in stone and shadow. Cafe windows glowed softly with candlelight, and waiters arranged chairs with gentle clinks of metal above. The sky turned pale blue as morning spread across rooftops. But down below, in the labyrinth of forgotten tunnels, the pulse of midnight continued without pause. Somewhere deep under far from the noise of trams and tourists, corridors twisted like serpents, their walls etched with symbols that seemed to breathe in those dark veins. The remnants of an order older than the Republic moved silently. The air there was colder still, carrying the scent of earth and ancient memory, as though the city itself remembered centuries it could not tell. And there, in the depths, something shifted, not with footsteps or voice, but with a change in the weight of the air, a soft, certain hum that spoke of inevitability. Somewhere above, Paris went on, unaware below. Midnight awakened again. The man's footsteps carried him across the cobblestones without hesitation. He walked as though he bore both the weight of knowledge and the release of it. Every movement was precise, deliberate, as though the city guided him by some unseen will. He did not look back, though somewhere deep inside, he knew that what he had taken from the catacomb chamber was not simply a ring or a book. It was a covenant, a promise bound in shadow and stone. Somewhere in the breadth of Paris, that promise was already breathing into life. Along the Rue Saint-Denis, cafes were preparing for the morning rush. Steam rose in curls from cups of espresso. A butcher opened his shutters, The scent of fresh bread and cured meats drifting across the street. Children laughed as they ran past, their voices echoing against walls worn smooth by centuries of rain. The man passed unnoticed, a shadow among shadows, until he reached the Pont Neuf, where the Seine flowed wide and silent beneath arches of stone. He paused there, looking out over the water, the silver ring on his hand catching the first real light of day above the bridge. Pigeons stirred in the dawn, their wings scattering in soft flutters across the city. Bells rang, not one, but many, their deep, measured tolls drifting through the morning air. Somewhere in the bell's cadence was the same hum he had heard beneath the stone. The same certainty that midnight was not over Paris breathed in those bells, carrying their resonance through narrow alleys, across plazas, into the hearts of those who walked unaware of the war just fought beneath their feet. And then, without warning, he felt it, a change in the air. Subtle but undeniable, not a sound, not a movement, but a knowing, like a tide turning somewhere beneath him, in the bones of the city. A passage opened somewhere, deep under Paris. The heart of midnight had stirred, the hum grew, faint at first, then stronger, until it seemed to come not from stone or air, but from the city itself. The man turned his head slightly, though there was no one to see, and the whisper came again, soft and deliberate. Midnight belongs to you. Stepped from the bridge into the streets, blending into the waking crowd, but his mind carried the weight of what he had learned, the ledger, the ring, the altar. They were not the end of a story, they were the opening of one that Paris itself would live for centuries. Somewhere beneath the cafes and markets, beneath the laughter and footsteps, the war continued, patient and eternal through the day. He moved without rest. Tracing the veins of the city, he passed the Place de la Concorde, where the fountains glistened with morning light, and the market at Rue Mouffetard, where fruit stalls overflowed with peaches and figs. He moved past churches, ringing their bells, past streets where artists set up their easels, past cafes where people drank coffee and told stories. Everywhere he walked, Paris was alive, but beneath it all, midnight was alive. To evening came again, the city's light shifted, the air cooling, shadows lengthening like dark fingers across the stones. He walked toward the edges of Paris, where the streets grew quieter, where buildings leaned into each other under centuries of weight. There, in the forgotten corners of the city, entrances to tunnels waited. They were small doors of iron, hidden beneath ivy and moss. There, wood worn smooth by hands that had touched them long before memory. He found one such door, and without hesitation, he pressed his palm against it. It gave way. Inside was the silence of stone. He descended again, torch in hand, the hum of midnight guiding him deeper still. He went, past corridors that twisted impossibly, past walls carved with runes that glimmered faintly. The air grew colder with every step. Somewhere ahead, a light burned softly. It was the same light from the chamber, the altar of stone. He came to it without knowing how. He knew, as though the city had drawn him there, and there, in that place older than Paris itself, the hum became a voice, not spoken, but felt, deep in the bones. Midnight belongs to you. Stepped forward, the silver ring on his finger caught the light. The chamber breathed around him. Somewhere above, Paris slept, but beneath, the war was alive, and the city knew it. The chamber seemed to breathe around him, the air growing heavier, vibrating faintly underfoot. He moved closer to the altar, his boots silent against the stone, and with every step, the hum of midnight grew stronger, threading through his bones, until it felt as though the city itself was speaking directly to him. The silver ring pulsed softly, not with light, but with something deeper, a weight of inevitability, of an ancient promise renewed. He placed his hand upon the ledger, feeling the rough leather warm beneath his fingers. Symbols shifted under his touch, as though the book were alive, rewriting itself in the silence. Somewhere in the vast corridors of stone, cloaked figures stirred, drawn to the altar without sound, their movement like shadow passing over shadow. The air was no longer still, it thrummed with the rhythm of something eternal, a song older than the city, a voice that whispered again with certainty. Midnight belongs to you. She looked up, seeing the stone walls tremble, as if they remembered every hour of every night Paris had ever known. Somewhere in that trembling was the answer he sought, not in words, but in a certainty he could feel in his chest. He knew then that the ring, the ledger, the altar, they were not relics of an ending, but the instruments of a beginning somewhere above ground. Paris carried on, as if nothing had changed. Children played in the streets, cafes filled with laughter, and the Seine flowed under bridges, whose stones had been worn smooth by centuries, but beneath it all, the city breathed differently. Midnight was awake. He stepped away from the altar, the hum fading to a whisper, and felt the weight of the moment press against him, somewhere deep in Paris. Beneath streets lit by the rising moon, the war for the city's soul continued. He could not stop it. He could only choose how to stand within it. The cloaked figures faded into the stone, leaving him alone with the altar, the ledger, and the ring. He turned toward the stair that led upward, toward life, toward the waking city. The climb was slow, each step carrying the memory of centuries. When he emerged, Paris was alive in a way that felt unchanged, and yet entirely different. Street lamps glowed softly in the fog, and the air smelled of bread and rain. Somewhere nearby, a bell tolled midnight. His breath caught somewhere deep beneath the city. The hum stirred again. He walked into the streets, unseen and unremarked, the silver ring on his finger catching the light of the lamps. Paris went on. It always did. Cafes hummed with voices. Footsteps echoed through narrow lanes. Lovers met beneath bridges. Yet the memory of the chamber, the altar, the whisper, they followed him somewhere in the bones of the city. The promise remained alive. Midnight belonged to Paris now, and Paris belonged to midnight. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of a bell tolled again, low and deep. The man in the coat paused. Feeling the weight of centuries upon him, he looked toward the horizon, where the city stretched endless under the moonlight. The hum was quiet now, but certain. Somewhere in the stone, in the shadow, in the air between breaths, it waited, patient, eternal. And Paris, in its waking and in its sleeping, would never forget, because midnight was not simply a time. Midnight was the city itself, and the city was theirs. The man in the coat moved through Paris as though it were both a dream and a battlefield. The silver ring glinted faintly under street lamps, a promise of power and a mark of destiny around him. The city breathed with a life older than its towers and boulevards. The scent of coffee drifted from cafes, mixed with the subtle perfume of autumn leaves and stone warmed by the fading day. Somewhere far above, a clock tower chimed softly, each toll carrying with it the weight of time and the certainty of what was to come. The hum beneath his feet was faint but constant, threading through the soles of his boots and climbing into his bones. Somewhere deep in the earth, in the labyrinth of the city's memory, midnight stirred again. He wandered through narrow streets, past shuttered windows and open cafes, where laughter and conversation spilled into the night air. The Seine shimmered beside him, carrying reflections of lights that seemed to dance with secret knowledge. Somewhere ahead, in a shadowed square, a figure watched him, cloaked and silent. They did not speak, they did not move. They were part of the city's breathing, a shadow among shadows. The man felt their gaze and knew they were bound to him by something older than loyalty. Somewhere beneath them, the catacombs shifted again, corridors twisting without reason, as if the city itself was moving. The hum grew, a voice forming in the stone. Midnight belongs to Yush, paused in the square, the noise of the city dimming around him. Somewhere, distant footsteps echoed, not in time with the crowd, not with the rhythm of life above, but in the cadence of something deeper, an ancient march that had never stopped. Somewhere beyond the stone, beneath centuries of silence, a war waited, and he carried the sign of it in his hand. The ring pulsed softly, not with light, but with an unshakable certainty. The man stepped forward, leaving the square, and walked toward the edges of the city, where Paris became quieter, Where the streets grew thin and shadows deeper, he found the entrance to an alley that was older than the city itself. Where stone walls bent inward, like the ribs of some great beast, the air grew colder here. And the hum grew louder, vibrating through the air until it became almost a voice, whispering promises and truths he could not yet name. He pressed forward, past the cobblestones that remembered every footstep, past arches carved with runes, into a part of the city no map would hold at last. He came to another iron door, smaller than the one in Montmartre, but humming with the same deep certainty. His palm pressed against it, and it gave way, without resistance. Inside was silence that was heavy enough to feel. The torchlight he carried stretched long shadows over walls etched with the language of centuries, runes that seemed to breathe faintly in the flickering light. The corridor twisted downward until it opened into another chamber, vast, circular, and crowned with stone columns that seemed to hum with life. At the center stood another altar, smaller but no less powerful, with a single object resting upon it, a silver key, its surface etched with symbols older than Paris itself. The man approached it, the hum rising to a voice that filled the chamber, soft but absolute. "Midnight belongs to us." He reached out and touched the key, feeling a rush of knowledge flood through him, of battles fought and lost, of promises made in shadows, of wars that could never truly end. Somewhere in that moment, he knew that what he had taken from the first chamber was not the end, but the first step. The war for Paris's soul was still alive, patient and eternal above ground. Paris continued to breathe in light and life, unaware of what moved beneath its feet. Somewhere in the silence of stone, the promise of midnight endured, carried in whispers and shadows, waiting for the hour when the city would awaken again. And the man in the coat walked on. The man in the coat walked on, deeper into Paris, as though guided by some unseen hand, each step carrying the weight of the promise he now bore. The streets he passed grew quieter, less certain, as though the city was bending inward to conceal its own heart. The air thickened with the scent of stone and rain-warmed earth, and somewhere ahead, the hum rose again, a low, steady vibration that seemed to pulse in harmony with his own breath. The lamplight glimmered faintly off the silver ring on his finger, not merely reflecting light but catching it, folding it into something older, something alive. He knew that what he carried was no ordinary relic. The ledger, the ring, the key, they were parts of a covenant written long before Paris existed, etched into the bones of the city, whispered into the stone of its foundations. Somewhere beneath him, the city remembered. He moved without pause, drawn toward an alley older than memory, where the stones were uneven, worn smooth by centuries of unseen passage. Here, there were no cafes, no laughter, only the faintest echo of the city above, carried through walls of stone like a dream. Half remembered, the hum grew louder, a voice now that spoke without words, a certainty that pressed into his mind. Somewhere in this place, beneath the streets, was the heart of midnight itself. He felt it in the marrow of his bones, a calling that would not be denied. The alley widened into a square, forgotten by maps, where the air was colder still, and shadows gathered in corners as though to speak. At the center lay another door of iron, smaller, older, its surface etched with runes that seemed to shift beneath his eyes. The ring pulsed faintly again, and the whisper came once more. "Midnight belongs to us." He placed his hand on the door, and it opened without sound, revealing a stair descending into darkness deeper than he had known. The hum became a chorus, echoing softly from the stone as he stepped downward. The stair twisted and narrowed until it opened into a chamber vast beyond. Imagining stone columns rose in a ring around a hollow altar at its center. The air here was thick with memory, and the hum now carried voices, faint, melodic, speaking in a tongue that was not spoken, but remembered. Upon the altar rested an object that seemed to draw the air toward it, a crystal sphere, faintly luminous, within which shadows moved of their own accord. The man approached, and the ring on his finger glowed brighter, pulling him closer. The hum became a song, and in its sound was the knowledge of centuries, of wars fought beneath the city, of promises written in blood and stone, of midnight waiting always. He reached out and touched the sphere. A shock of understanding coursed through him, visions of the city, not as it was, but as it had always been, and would always be, a living thing, bound by darkness, memory, and promise. He saw streets built over streets, lives folded into lives, battles hidden beneath the laughter of cafes, and the quiet steps of lovers. Somewhere in the vision was the truth he had sought, that midnight was not a moment, but a condition, an eternal state of the city itself, and in that truth, he understood that his path was no longer his own. He was bound to the city, and the city was bound to midnight. The hum faded into silence above ground. Paris breathed in the soft light of dawn somewhere. Distant bells told. The man in the coat stepped away from the altar, the crystal sphere humming faintly beneath his touch, the silver ring glinting as if alive somewhere in the city. Hidden beneath its streets, the war still waited, patient and eternal, and he knew, with a certainty that was no longer his own, but part of something greater, that midnight had claimed him. He climbed the stairs slowly, the air above growing warmer, carrying the scent of rain and bread, of life itself. When he emerged, the street was quiet, save for the hum of the waking city. Lamps glowed softly in the mist, and the Seine reflected the pale gold of morning. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled again. Low and certain, the man in the coat stepped into the street, and the whisper came once more, carried by the air. The man in the coat walked on, deeper into the veins of Paris, where the air grew heavier, charged with the breath of centuries. His steps were soundless, his presence swallowed by the hush of the streets, as though the city itself bent around him, guiding him toward something unseen. The lamplight above flickered faintly in the mist, casting long shadows that seemed to move of their own accord somewhere far below. The hum of midnight pulsed stronger, threading through the stones beneath his feet, like the memory of an ancient heartbeat. The ring on his finger pulsed in answer, its light faint but steady, a rhythm in tune with the city's own. Somewhere, in the depths beneath Montparnasse, a chamber waited, older than memory, its doors sealed for centuries. The man did not hesitate. He knew that his steps were not his own, that something deeper, older, moved him toward it. The alley narrowed, stone pressing inward on all sides. His breath came slow and measured, each exhale carrying with it the scent of rain and earth above. The city moved, without him noticing. The hum of life carried on, unbroken, unaware of the war that moved beneath it. Somewhere in the twisting shadows ahead, the hum became a voice once more, low and certain. Midnight belongs to us. The man stepped forward and found the door, wrought iron etched with runes that seemed to shift in the faint light of his torch. His palm pressed against it, and the metal gave without resistance. The door opened to silence so deep it felt like a wound in the air itself. He descended, each step carrying him deeper into a darkness that was alive. The air grew colder, thicker, and the hum became a chorus, voices singing in a tongue lost to time. The stair twisted down into something vast, endless, until it opened into a chamber greater than any cathedral, its walls carved with runes that shimmered faintly in the torchlight. Stone columns rose like guardians around an altar at its heart, and upon that altar lay an object that drew the air toward it, a crystal orb, glowing softly with a light that seemed to come from within the world itself. The man approached, and the ring on his finger flared with brilliance, as though it recognized the moment. The hum became a song, a sound that moved through stone, air, and blood. He reached for the orb, and the moment his fingers touched it, the world shifted. He saw the city not as it was, but as it had been and would always be, a living thing bound by shadow and promise, breathing in the footsteps of every soul who had walked its streets. He saw corridors beneath corridors, battles fought in silence, oaths whispered into stone, and above all, he saw the truth. Midnight was not a time. Midnight was the city itself, and the city had chosen him. He withdrew his hand slowly, The orb, pulsing faintly, and turned to leave. The hum faded. But the certainty remained. Somewhere above, Paris breathed under the hush of dawn, unaware of the covenant made in its heart somewhere in its stone. Midnight waited, patient and eternal. The man climbed the stair, his steps echoing softly in the stone. When he emerged, Paris greeted him with the scent of rain and bread, of life carried on without knowing. Lamps glimmered softly in the mist, and somewhere a bell tolled, slow and deep. He walked into the streets, the ring on his finger glowing faintly, the whisper still in his mind, "Midnight belongs to us." And, as he walked, the city answered. Paris was not the same. Paris could never be the same, for the war beneath its streets was eternal, and midnight was patience, somewhere, in stone and shadow. It waited forever. The man in the coat moved onward, his steps guided by something older than memory, deeper than will. As though Paris itself breathed him forward, the streets around him had emptied, save for a distant footfall here and a whisper there. Sounds that seemed both accidental and intended. The lamplight flickered like a pulse, casting pools of gold into the mist that curled lazily over the cobblestones somewhere above. The city's breath was steady and calm, but beneath his feet, the hum persisted, not merely sound, but a living cadence that drew him forward somewhere far below, hidden in stone corridors carved before the city had names. The heart of midnight throbbed like a secret drum. The ring on his finger pulsed softly, a signal of covenant, and somewhere deep inside him, he knew this journey was not his own, that his path was part of a design older than Paris itself. He moved into a narrower alley, one older than the city's memory, where stones curved inward, as though to keep secrets safe. The air was cooler here, heavier, smelling of earth and rain. Soaked history above. Life went on, cafes opening, voices rising, laughter drifting. But here, in the narrowing of the street, the city seemed to hush, as if holding its breath. Somewhere ahead, the hum became more insistent, threading into the air like a voice that had waited centuries to speak. He reached the iron door at the end of the alley, its surface blackened with age and carved in runes that shifted subtly. When seen out of the corner of the eye, the ring flared faintly as he laid his palm on it, and without resistance, the door opened into silence so deep it felt alive, a silence that seemed to draw breath from the stones themselves. He stepped inside, descending a stair that wound downward as though into the very spine of the city. The air grew colder with each step, carrying the scent of stone and shadow, of things buried and never named somewhere far below. Corridors twisted impossibly, leading toward a heart of the city that no map could contain. The hum rose to a chorus, voices in a language older than any known tongue, weaving sound into stone. And in that sound was the certainty he had sought at last. The stair opened into a vast chamber, greater than any cathedral, carved entirely from living stone, that pulsed faintly with light. Stone columns rose like sentinels in a circle, enclosing an altar at the center, and upon that altar lay an orb that glowed with the light of something beyond day and night, an object that seemed to breathe in the silence. The man approached, the ring on his finger growing warm, as though it recognized the moment of truth. The hum became a song, resonant and deep, threading through the stone and air until it filled every breath. He touched the orb, and the world shifted, not with sound, but with vision. He saw Paris as it had been in centuries past, streets buried beneath streets, lives layered upon lives, secrets folded into stone. He saw the silent wars fought beneath its surface, the promises sealed in shadow, the endless turning of midnight's tide. Above all, he saw that midnight was not merely an hour, but the living soul of Paris, a force patient enough to endure forever. And in that vision, he understood that he was no longer alone. He was part of something eternal, bound to the city in a covenant of shadow and silence. He stepped away from the altar, the orb still glowing softly, the hum fading but leaving behind a certainty that thrummed in his blood somewhere above. Paris woke, breathing into the light of dawn without knowing how it had changed somewhere below. The heart of midnight beat. Still the man climbed the stair, each step echoing softly, until he emerged once more into the streets. Lamps glowed softly in the mist, cafes breathed warmth, and the Seine carried its silver ribbon of light through the waking city somewhere. Distant and deep, a bell tolled, low and deliberate. The man walked on, the silver ring on his finger pulsing faintly, the whisper still in his mind. Midnight belongs to a sand, Paris answered, as it always had, for the war beneath its streets was patient and the city was there somewhere. In stone and shadow, midnight waited forever. The man in the coat walked on without haste, as though Paris itself carried him forward through streets that had become quieter, older. The sound of his steps swallowed by something heavier than air. The lamplight above flickered faintly in the creeping mist, casting elongated shadows that seemed to shift when he was not looking directly at them. Somewhere far beneath, deep in the city's veins, the hum persisted. No longer a sound, but a pulse, a slow breathing that seemed to belong to the stones themselves. He felt it in his chest, a resonance that moved in time with the ring upon his finger. A cold certainty that something deeper awaited him still somewhere beneath Monk. Through corridors older than memory, a hidden place waited. Closed for centuries, he knew he would find it. That the city had led him here. The air grew heavier as he entered an alley, older than recollection. One lined with stones, worn smooth by countless footsteps. The faint scent of wet earth rose in curls around him, mixing with the quiet breath of the city above. Here, there was no noise but his own steps and the hum, low but insistent, that wrapped around the stone like an ancient song. He came to another door, wrought iron and blackened with age, carved with runes that seemed to twist and pulse in the torchlight. The ring flared softly at the sight of it, and his palm rested against the cold metal. The door moved under his touch without resistance, opening to a darkness that felt alive, breathing, waiting. He descended again, each step carrying him deeper into a silence that was not absence, but presence. The stair twisted downward, until it opened into a vast chamber carved of living stone, the walls alive with faint motion. As runes glimmered softly, stone columns rose like guardians in a ring, enclosing an altar that pulsed faintly. Breathing with its own slow rhythm. Upon it rested an object that drew the air toward it, a sphere of crystal glowing with light that seemed drawn from before time. As he stepped closer, the ring on his finger flared with warmth, and the hum became a chorus, a voice without words, singing deep in the marrow of the city. His fingers touched the sphere, and the world shifted, not in sight, not in sound, but in knowing. He saw Paris not as it was, but as it always had been, a living thing bound by shadow and promise, breathing in the footsteps of those who had walked its streets in fighting wars. Buried beneath laughter and light, he saw corridors beneath corridors, centuries folded into stone, the endless turning of midnight itself. And in that vision, the truth was clear. Midnight was not a moment, but a condition, eternal and patient. And Paris its chosen host. He stepped back, the orb pulsing faintly, the hum fading into silence but leaving a weight in the air that pressed into his bones. Somewhere above, Paris breathed into dawn without knowing how it had changed somewhere beneath its streets. Midnight waited. He climbed the stair with deliberate steps, emerging into a city, waking in gold light. The Seine shimmering softly under a sky that knew nothing of the covenant sealed in stone below. Lamps glowed faintly in the mist. Cafes exhaled steam. Laughter echoed softly. Somewhere a bell tolled. Deep and slow, the man walked on, the silver ring on his finger, pulsing faintly. The whisper still in his mind, "Midnight belongs to us," and Paris answered. The war beneath its streets was patient. The city was theirs, and somewhere in stone and shadow, midnight waited forever.